Hey, Rick here. Good morning. It's Thursday morning on a sunny and windy and cool day here in central Illinois. I hope you and all of yours are doing well as we celebrate this Holy or Passion, Jesus' Passion Week. I want to encourage you. We're going to continue to go through our time of devotion as we look at different aspects of the week of Jesus' last week here on earth. And as I've shared before, that over a third of the Gospels cover this last week of Jesus' life. It really is central to his life, his ministry, and what it means for those of us who are his followers. After not only the Last Supper and the betrayal of Judas happened, or was about to happen, Jesus goes from the upper room, and he goes with some of his disciples out to the Garden of Gethsemane by the Mount of Olives. It's about a 15-minute walk, and it's a fantastic walk being there. And the Garden of Gethsemane is filled with olive trees, gorgeous olive trees. Probably did this because it would be a little cooler, get the breeze, him and his disciples, and then he goes off with just a few of his disciples to actually pray. Now, a couple of the writers, I think it was Matthew that writes that he was just troubled and in stress. It was Mark who I think that wrote that he was really deeply distressed. Jesus uttered the words in his prayer time that my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Have you ever been there before? Completely overwhelmed with sorrow to the point where you just want it to end. You know, it's easy to gloss over some of the stories of Jesus. We've heard them so many times. If you grew up at church or Sunday school or go to church services for Easter, Christmas, and it's just easy to sanitize the words and to really not sense the meaning, but how deeply, deeply distressed Jesus was. As a matter of fact, thinking about this is oftentimes he would go and pray by himself, but this is one time where he chose to pray and have his disciples right there. He wanted his disciples right there. It's kind of innately human that in the midst of great stress, we need people to be around us. I think it's one of the saddest things about this pandemic right now is reading the stories of grandparents or parents of people who can't be with their loved ones as they transition from this life to the next. Because ultimately, no, there's something wrong with that we're meant to be together. And to die alone is one of the saddest human tragedies that there is. But as I read the stories, and I encourage you to do that, I detect in this garden there is just a deep sense of loneliness that maybe Jesus had never experienced before. To the point of great sorrow, he cries out to God. And when his disciples fail him, when they fall asleep, as you know the story, he just fires back. Could you not even stay awake for just 1 hour? And it just kind of senses, there's a sense there of just a deep loneliness. It's almost like he didn't want to be alone at that time, or maybe alone with God at that time. Regardless, the gospel writers let us in that Jesus is really struggling. And that's part of what I think is important in the story, is the struggle. Anybody hearing this right now, you know what it's like to struggle? To be alone, to sense a deep sense of loneliness and abandonment. That's part of the human experience. And if you have, I think most of us have at some point or another. I think others of us, it's just it's a deep part of their lives. It's some people suffer from depression and deep sense of loneliness. And I think in part, when you read a story like this, that we can take heart that Jesus understands that feeling. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're feeling during this time, Jesus understands. Jesus has been there. What's so different about him in Christianity and other religions is that no other religion teaches that God became man, became fully man, became one of us, and understands what it's like to be us. In this prayer time, there's no pious prayers from Jesus. There's no overtly religious prayers from Jesus. The disciples who are part of this just simply write, he he just would say, take this cup from me, like he was arguing with God. Take this. If it be your will, take this cup of suffering from me. And he prays harder and harder and harder. And I think what he's also struggling with is the fear of pain and death. Too often, I believe too often that we're just too quick to forget about Jesus' humanity. So much of our focus is on the emphasis of Jesus and his deity, his being fully God. And I think that by doing this, we miss so much of what we can learn about God and about ourselves in this God life. Jesus no more relishes the prospect of death and pain than you and I do. Think about it. I think it's part of what's going on here in the Garden of Gethsemane. As you read for yourself, really think about that. Maybe, just maybe, it's Jesus beginning to experience something he had never experienced before. That is a God forsakenness, a God abandonment. In reality, that's why I'm going to name this devotion, the story of unanswered prayer is he prays for this cup of suffering to be lifted from him. He's praying and praying earnestly to the point of blood, the sweat pouring off of his temples like blood. That's deep prayer, stressful prayer, and it's unanswered prayer. Have you been there before? I know I have. Where you pray and you pray about something and it just feels like your prayers are bouncing off the wall or bouncing off the ceiling and just seems to be unanswered. Jesus' requests at this point were also unanswered. Never stop and think about that. It must have surely felt like God the Father had turned away from him. And I don't think Jesus had ever experienced this before whatsoever. It was terrifying for Jesus, as it is frustrating and terrifying for us at times. But then something very interesting happens after hours of prayer and unanswered prayer. Jesus knows it's time to trust the Father. And Jesus and the Father's will converge. And this is the part that I wish we get more insight into. But if you've ever had this experience, you can understand this. There's a point where you're praying and you're praying and you're praying. Maybe it's even about this time right now. Maybe it's about your health or somebody else's health or the economy or just health, whatever it is. And you're praying, and it just seems to be unanswered. At some point, though, there's a convergence. Maybe it's for a loved one or a relationship or whatever it is. And it's all about, it's like all of a sudden you realize it's not going to change. And you've got a choice to make. And Jesus knows the time to trust the Father has come, and his will and the Father's will converge. It's the cup of suffering. He asked to be removed, but then he embraces it. And he embraces it. I remind you, as I've been sharing all week, you cannot have the resurrection without death. In this case, it was the death of even Jesus' own human will. To take the cup of suffering, of pain, of fear, of death away. God doesn't do that. Because you cannot have the miracle of the resurrection and all of its consequences without the death. And Jesus even told them this after his resurrection on the road to Emmaus when he appeared to his followers. And he even said, I think it was in Luke, that he said, did not the Christ have to suffer these things? As a reminder, this is all part of God's plan. So Jesus gets up. And the story just kind of ends in the different gospel accounts of him getting up, embracing which is about to happen to him, and he walks towards those who are about to kill him. At some point, we all in our lives have to commit these things that are so near to us, the things that we're fearful about, that we pray about, the things that we are sometimes so worried about. And there comes a time where we just have to act by faith, trusting God for the results. Jesus' words, take a little look at more tomorrow. He says these words as his life is about to go on the cross. Into my hands I commit my spirit. Into thy hands, God, I commit my life. Maybe that's the prayer that we need to pray today. Whatever fear you're going through, or whatever hurt and pain and suffering, maybe goes way beyond what we're experiencing right now in this pandemic. Maybe just part of it, the pandemic just exasperates it all. A sense of loneliness, a sense of abandonment, a sense of when you're alone more than you'd like to be, you sense something's not right in your soul. And part of it, you'd rather just ignore it, numb it. And it's hard to do that now. Maybe it's time to go to prayer and give this, whatever this is for you, to God. And you pray about it. But then at some point, and I don't know when that is going to be for you, I think we're all a little unique this way, is at some point, I look at Jesus' example, and he embraces it. His will and the Father's will converges, and he moves forward. Here's what I want to leave you with for hope this week. It's after this, shortly after this, God's greatest miracle, in order to save the world, brings life to the world. It's shortly after this time that God does his greatest work. From that which seems to be death, his birth, real, everlasting life. There is no resurrection without the death. But through the death, we have a resurrection. Happy Thursday. Hope you have a great day.